Cars, buses, traffic. In this day and age, you see motorized vehicles everywhere you go, especially in the area we live in. Vehicles are a valuable tool that make life a lot easier for us, and it's impossible to see their use decreasing. But as humans, we have to take a step back and think. Could these motorized vehicles be harming us more in the long run?
To answer these questions, we're going to have to give you knowledge that's essential to living on this planet. I'm Cornelius Bartholomew, and I'll be your host for tonight on this special NBC program. Carbon is an element that is essential for all life. It is located all over the world, in the atmosphere, the crust, the oceans, and even in us.
Carbon also travels from one reservoir to the other, which is known as the carbon cycle. There is a lot of carbon stored underneath the earth in fossil fuels. When these fossil fuels are burned, the carbon is released into the atmosphere as the compound CO2, a compound between oxygen and carbon. CO2 naturally occurs in the world, but with the burning of fossil fuels, there is an amount present in the world that is definitely not normal.
The Earth can only naturally process about half of the carbon emissions that we are putting out. What happens is, the CO2 gets in the atmosphere and traps the sun rays, keeping heat in. This is what's known as the greenhouse effect.
Since the discovery of fossil fuels as an energy source, the world has quickly progressed, and we've seen the world quickly connect with each other, at a rate never seen before. This, however, has come at a cost. The more we use fossil fuels, the more we are damaging our environment. Not only are fossil fuels a finite source, they contribute highly to climate change. Studies show the US gets 81% of its energy from fossil fuels. Most of the fossil fuel intake is for transportation means of regular American citizens. However, just like this gas station meter, the numbers are slowly rising.
To explain more about carbon emissions and the statistics behind it, we now go to the chief leading analyst on carbon emissions for the United States of America, Mr. Cameron Foti.
Cameron Foti, and I'm Chief Analyst of Carbon Emissions for the United States of America. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and traps heat in the atmosphere. Without it, and other greenhouse gases, Earth would be a frozen world. But humans have burned so much fuel that there is about 30% more carbon dioxide in the air today than there was about 150 years ago. The atmosphere has not held this much carbon for at least 420,000 years, according to data from the ice cores. More greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, in our atmosphere are causing our planet to become warmer. Carbon dioxide isn't the only greenhouse gas, although it is one of the more vital ones. Our greenhouse gases include methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone. The most recent extensive study on carbon emissions per country was in 2015, run by the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency and the European Commission. The study only checked CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels and didn't calculate it from other fossil fuels. The study showed the top carbon emission contributors and how much CO2 they contributed in CO2 tons. A smaller study was also ran in 2016, but only the top level contributors. China contributed about 29.51% of total world carbon emissions, being the highest contributor. The United States followed closely with 14.34% of the world's total carbon emissions. As the United States had a higher emissions per capita rate. This means that each individual person in the United States contributed more to the carbon emissions than the individuals in China. If we had the same population as China, the effects we'd have on the environment would be devastating. As Americans, our current goal should be reducing our individual emissions drastically. Each single person and every single action count when it comes to saving the environment. We can all take multiple steps to ensure this.
Every human has a carbon footprint. This footprint is how much CO2 we emit throughout our actions. We can take multiple steps to each reduce our carbon footprint. These steps include biking, walking, taking the bus, or carpooling instead of driving. Eating organic. The meat industry emits more carbon dioxide than almost any other industry. Planting trees and other plants helps raise the level of carbon dioxide the world can naturally process. This gives back to the community and the environment.
using machines as least as possible. For example, drying your clothes outside on a warm day instead of using a dryer. And most of all, unplugging your devices when you're not using them. Even when simply plugged in, there's actually a small amount of electricity that is still being discharged from the plug. Unplugging your devices will decrease this amount.
It seems that most of the world's ignorant about both climate change and carbon emissions. We need to change this in decades to come, and breaking that pattern starts with the youth. Because of this, we interviewed 2 high school teachers. One, an astronomy teacher and former NASA associate, Mr. Russell Humans, and another one, sponsor of the Green Atoms, and Geosystems teacher, Ms. Kathleen Walsh.
I teach Geosystems at Annandale High School, and I'm also the faculty sponsor for the Green Atoms, our student environmental club.
How urgent of a problem do you think climate change is?
I think it's very urgent. I think that some of the extreme weather we seem to be having is a testament to the fact that we can't ignore this much longer.
What advice could you give to the students to decrease carbon emissions?
Every little bit helps. So think about things like carpooling. Does every student need to drive him or herself? Maybe it's not cool to ride school buses, but the bus is going to be running anyway, and if you're on the bus rather than driving your own car, that's a help. Recycling helps too. Most people don't realize, but refining bauxite into aluminum is an incredibly energy-intensive process, so remembering to recycle aluminum cans helps. There's lots of ways that you can save power in your house, turning appliances off, turning your thermostats down. There's a lot of things we can do as individuals.
And how can all countries come together to decrease carbon emissions?
That's a difficult one. I think, much like a progressive tax system, I think wealthier countries need to understand that they need to take more
How
responsibility.
does increase in CO2 levels affect people?
Well, it's the same, people who live in coastal areas have their livelihood affected. It's getting more and more expensive to insure property if you live in a coastal area. We had a talk here in December by someone who specializes in indigenous people in the Arctic, and it's had a huge impact on them. Normally, Eskimos and Inuits don't need refrigeration. When you kill a polar bear, it's so cold that the meat is naturally refrigerated, and now it isn't. So that's creating problems. You have small countries in the Pacific Ocean, like the Maldives, whole countries that could disappear with rising sea levels.
And last question, what do you predict will happen with CO2 levels in the future?
I don't see any reason why they're not going to continue to rise. As long as we are stuck on our lifestyles, they will continue to rise. I hope that we can slow the rate of growth, but I'm not really seeing a possibility of
How has recent increase in CO2 levels affected the Earth?
in more ways than we know. We definitely see all the severe weather we're having, the fact that we're having more hurricanes and the hurricane season has gotten so much longer. That's an impact. I just heard something on the radio this morning. There is a problem with starfish off the coast of California. A particular kind of starfish has a bacterial infection, and scientists believe that this epidemic in the starfish, it has been created by the warmer temperatures and the fact that it's compromised their immune system. So now the sea urchin population, which is normally eaten by the starfish, is out of whack. So it's changing the whole ecosphere. And there's just lots of little things like that. We tend to think of the big ones like sea level, and that's certainly important in weather, but there are all sorts of little consequences of climate change, and that we're just not.
My name is Mr. Yeomans. I'm a science teacher here at Annandale High School. I think people are uneducated about a lot of things. Global warming is hard because it's a long-term effect. We have a short life, and we get so busy, we don't think about long-term effects. I think that's why we're uneducated.
How do you think global warming will affect us students' lifetimes?
I think it will significantly impact your lives. I think health and job opportunities and your children are all going to be significantly impacted, because I think that the global warming is going to have serious effects in the next 1 to 100 years.
What do you think is the biggest contributor to global warming?
I think the biggest contributor is, in the long term, carbon dioxide, and in the short term, methane. And these gases are produced because of what people are doing. We're producing both of those gases because of agriculture and burning fossil fuels, and that's the biggest contribution to global warming.
What do you think is most important for students to know about global warming?
It's a very serious problem. Maybe for the first time, technology is definitely going to make things worse instead of making things better. For the first time, maybe in civilization, we're going to actually get much, much worse because of this.
What's your opinion on global warming?
Global warming isn't. Climate change is real. The Earth may be warming, but it's always had periods of warming and cooling throughout the Earth's history. I don't think that right now is a significant threat as everyone makes it seem to be.
Do you believe carbon emissions increases global warming?
Yes, because studies show that emissions released from cars and other vehicles released in the atmosphere diminish the ozone layer, and it's bad for the environment. So yes, it does increase global warming.
How do you help out the environment?
We help the environment by carpooling every morning to school.
And saving gas.
How big of a problem do you think global warming is?
I think global warming is a really big issue right now because we only have 12 years to fix it before it's irreversible and the world's kind of just screwed.
Now that you know more about carbon emissions, it is your job as a global citizen to give back to the community and environment. Take actions to reduce your carbon footprint, and most of all, raise awareness about what you've learned. The more people who are aware, the more can take action. We are all citizens of this world, and we are all accountable. Share this documentary and let others know what you've learned. I'm Cornelius Bartholomew, and thank you. Have a great night.